Hey guys, the Bible blog this week is Mark chapter 8 verse 22 through chapter 9 verse 1, and then Matthew chapter 20 verses 1 through 16. So, in Mark, it's talking about how Jesus heals the blind man, and then how Jesus asks, who do you think I am? And he asks that to the disciples. And then he, tells about his death and, the future of him dying and being, prosecuted. All that good jazz. And then tells them, hey, whoever doesn't follow me, you're going to choose death over life, and I'm the life, basically. One thing that's really remarkable about God with this thing is it starts off with Jesus healing the blind man, and then he goes into talking about how without him we do not have life, and how we cannot have life apart from God, and we can't be alive if we don't die to ourselves, and we're going to be blind if we don't die, if that makes sense. But basically, I thought that was really cool, the symbolism with that. And then later in verse 35, it says, "For whoever saves his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forsake his soul?" And then it goes into saying how, why should we be ashamed for something like Jesus? We shouldn't be ashamed of him. So what I thought, with humans, first of all, why do we even gather things? Why do we try to provide for tomorrow when tomorrow should take care of itself, and we shouldn't even think about that? I know personally, I worry a lot. Just as humans, we're worryful nature, and we just do that. But that, and also, why are we ashamed of the gospel? Why are we ashamed to die for God and die to our human self, and let Jesus live within us? That's one thing that kind of made me think of humans. And then for the creation part, I thought of how the man was blind and how Jesus had to heal him, because it's not creation or God's tendency to be blind. God wants us to experience things. God wants us to be alive and be able to see things. And so then again, it goes to God and showing us hey, I want you to see that I am the life, that you will not live unless you see me, unless you can be with me. I thought that was so cool. And then life's purpose is to know who Christ is, because if we don't know who he is, then how can we follow him? And basically, every other one, it's to follow him, but more importantly, to die to ourselves and follow him, die to our sinful nature and things like that. In Matthew, one of the first things I think of is, so I have sisters, I have a lot of sisters, but I remember my younger sister got a job to rake leaves or something, and then I came up to my mom. I was like, "Mom, I'm bored." And it was some fall weekend or something, I don't know. And so I was like, "Okay, well, your sister's raking leaves, why don't you go help her and I'll pay you, and I'll give you," I think it was $1, because I was young, but I remember her doing that. And then at the end of the day, my sister and I came back in, and we're like, "Okay, Mom, you owe me $1." And then my mom gave my younger sister $1, and then she gave me $1. I remember my younger sister's like, "Well, why does she get $1? Why does Erica get $1 when I was working there a lot longer?" And then my mom kind of explained how no matter what, she promised us that it should have been she didn't have to even give us money in the first place, and so not to even try to push off why are you giving them the same amount as me. So I like the analogy that my mom did. When we are one of the things I also see with this story is it's the gift of salvation. The money is the salvation almost. we live our lives, and some people live their entire, like basically they grew up in a church. They've been Christians since they've known, and they have known God for such a long time. And then there's other people who don't come to know Christ until they're either on their deathbed or like middle age or something like that. And I know people are like, well, why should they even go to heaven if like I've been doing this and I've been living right like all of this time, like 20, 40 years old, like years of my life I've been doing that. And then somebody who's only been a Christian for 5 years, why should they get the same reward? And so it's just kind of like that. And then Jesus comes up and he's like, the least of these will be the greatest in the kingdom. And one of the things I think about with that is like coming from the background where I didn't necessarily grow up Christian per se. I always feel like some of my past is more harsh than people who grew up in the church. And so like when I'm talking to my friends and they're like, yeah, my biggest sin is like trying not to judge people. And then I'm over here like, oh, that's not mine. Like it's almost like God is saying like those who are righteous, who have known, like the Sadducees and the Pharisees, like God condemns those people more than, or Jesus condemns those people more than he condemns the people who are like prostitutes and tax collectors and things like that. And so it almost makes me feel like it is not okay to have a rough past, but how it's basically almost better to know that you need Jesus rather than to always live with Jesus in your heart, like to always have that and know that you have him, but then still mess up. I almost feel like it's better to know that you need him rather than to think that you can do it on yourself. That kind of went over a lot of points, but the life purpose with that is, with that one, is that we need to learn to be okay in being humble and being okay with being the last and the least of everything. We need to learn that we don't have to live in luxury and things like that. It's not sin if we do, but the fact that God doesn't necessarily call us to do that, and that we can be humble in God's presence. That's really important. So yeah, thank you. I'd love to hear your points on what I said. So yeah, let me know.